This is the first time in Canadian history, and also the first time in the entire Westminster system's history, that we have had a majority government formed by floor crossers. They want you to feel like you have no power. They want you to feel like the system is broken. I certainly fear for what that's going to look like long term for Canadians. Every single media pundit who is talking about this knows that. They're not stupid. I think it would have been cool if the media could have maybe done some pieces being like, where did Mark Carney live for the years leading up to him running in Canada? If you go on CBC's website, there are more stories about Donald Trump, as an example, than there are about Mark Carney. Our retaliatory response has been far more vitriolic and in some ways far more consequential than what he has done. In what world are you supposed to benefit from turning your entire country against your neighbor? That's absurd to me. I think the handling of it all has been a weakness. It's been a bit of a fraud. Part of that could likely be a way to eradicate the Conservative Party as a whole.
Do you think there's a particular story about Mark Carney that the media isn't telling Canadians right now?
This is where people will probably start calling me names, but whatever. Come at me, bro.
Journalism commentary 1 year anniversary.
I don't believe journalism being funded by the government is the solution.
You have to rebuild the foundation. You have to retell the stories.
Market conservative
Other news that actually matters.
I hence wanted to ask. Do you think they should answer their questions, especially if they're politically charged? Prime Minister Mark Carney is currently making significant changes to Canada, changes that the legacy media, much of which is funded by his government, is happy to just go along with without any criticism. But one person who is not just going along and that is pushing back very well is Jasmin Laine. The former radio broadcaster has built one of the most successful conservative media platform in Canada. And while recently in Winnipeg, I had the opportunity to sit down with her. We talked about how Carney has handled the Canada-U.S. file, how the media covers Carney, and on that, I asked her what is the biggest story about Mark Carney that the media is not covering, and the answers are a must-watch. So without further ado, let's get to it. But first, be sure you like, subscribe. As Jasmin always says, comment your thoughts down below, and consider getting a paid subscription for less than $5 a month, because unlike the legacy media, I take $0 from Mark Carney. So without further ado, here's our conversation. Jasmin Laine, Mark Carney recently said that Canada's close ties with the United States have become a weakness. And he says this ahead of USMCA negotiations. What do you make of his positioning going into these negotiations and his overall handling of the Canada-U.S. file?
I mean, to put it blankly, I think the handling of it all has been a weakness. And it's been a bit of a fraud, certainly. You know, I understand that there is leverage. I understand that there are signals that you will send, especially through your words, through press releases, through doing things at the National Convention, through putting out all of these statements. I guess at this point in time, I really wonder what exactly that long-term strategy is, though. I don't think we have a clear answer to that. It's, you know, first he was the guy who was going to handle all of this, and then now he has this new committee, which in and of itself isn't bad. But I think diplomacy is really important. I would also say, you know, people who are critics would say, you know, Donald Trump and his administration haven't been diplomatic, and I would agree. Yes, no, they have not. So I get it, but having said that, this does really hurt Canada, and I think it's really wise to be smart with your words, and clearly that hasn't been the case. Most laughably, though, has been the fact that now everybody's saying, well, he didn't mean that. That's not what he meant to say. Well, you've been saying it for over a year, so can you please clarify what exactly it is that you meant to say then? Because there's real jobs on the line here, and whether you like it or not, we are incredibly integrated with America. So we can go ahead and diversify. I'm waiting to see the time frame of which when we will actually have infrastructure shovels in the ground to increase our export capacity at scale.
J.J. McCullough, he said, it's pretty obvious at this point that Carney's plan is to try to keep this country in a perpetual state of hate and fear towards the U.S. and use this to keep himself popular What are your thoughts on that statement? Do you think that's accurate?
I think so, yeah. Obviously, there's nuance within everything, but no, I would agree with that statement thoroughly. One thing that I found kind of interesting, though, is I'm not sure if you saw this, but even Doug Ford was back on CNN. He was back doing these talks saying that all American procurement is canceled, that Starlink is canceled, and all of these things are banned in Canada until these tariffs get removed, which, a piece of me understands that. The other big piece of me, though, wonders, okay, well, number one, why is it that almost every single time we see the Carney Liberal team back at the drawing board, as far as Canadians are aware at the very least, that suddenly Doug Ford comes in and it almost seems as though he is intentionally sabotaging it? My conspiratorial brain wonders if that could be because it's almost as though Doug Ford is the one who sabotages and takes the fall for the government, and the government gets to pretend like they're doing something, and then they don't have any of the consequences of their failure to actually do something. So that is curious to me. I also wonder too, one of the reasons why Americans invest how many billions into, Americans get how many billions of Canadian procurement contracts. Well, that's because the American product is obviously the preferred choice for these projects. Why is that? Productivity, cost, all of the above, perhaps skills, all of that. And so if you are now going to be banning them, innocent Americans who very well could have voted Democrat, from having any of these contracts, fair enough, but at what cost? Now your taxpayers going to have to, potentially have more delays in certain projects, potentially have to pay more in certain projects. I just don't quite understand the entire rationale behind things. And I would also highlight that whether you like it or not, it is a fact that when it comes to the tariff response from Canada to the United States of America, you can dislike Donald Trump all you want. You can dislike the comments he's made all you want. You can dislike the tariffs all that you want. That's okay. However, our retaliatory response has been far more vitriolic and in some ways far more consequential than what he has done. I mean, sure, they've said dumb things. They've said undiplomatic things, but ultimately, their policy hasn't increased in really shocking ways, I suppose. Like there's been a fair enough heads up for most things, whereas in Canada, it's like every second day, there's a different story, a new ban, a new boycott. And in what world are you supposed to benefit from turning your entire country against your neighbor, your best friend, people who you have fought wars with? That's absurd to me. It's so harmful, and it's also incredibly destructive to the human psyche. And I certainly fear for what that's going to look like long term for Canadians, because there are some people who really, really fall for the fear mongering. And again, that's not to suggest that it's not fair and within your right to be upset about the comments that have been made from the Trump administration. That's okay. But this is not diplomatic what Canada is doing. It seems spiteful. It seems petty. It seems unproductive. Moreover, it's very unproductive.
You've gotten the opportunity to interview the U.S. ambassador. In these conversations, is there something that you've learned from the Americans about how Canada's handled the trade relationship, this current conflict, that Canadians aren't being told about by the media? Maybe something that surprised you that you didn't expect from them. Is there anything there that you've taken away?
Like everything. I mean, number one, and this is easy to even check on your own, every country essentially in the world was hit with some form of a tariff. Every country has come to the table very differently. And Canada, for whatever reason, decided that they weren't going to take notes in any of that. And we were just going to stay in our bubble and keep on being proud to be Canadian because we're not American, whatever that means. So I would say the number one thing that I have learned from my conversations, not just with the U.S. ambassador, but from, I've traveled to America quite a few times in the last year. And it would also just be the fact that Americans do genuinely really love Canadians. They always have. Every time I go there, it's like, oh man, I'm so excited. Have you ever been to Niagara Falls? I want to go there so bad. Like, people are so excited about Canada. They've always been incredibly kind to us in many ways. You may not like the rhetoric coming out of the administration, but ultimately, Canada is one of the only countries next to China that doesn't have something on the drawing board here. And this has been like such a pattern with Canadian politicians under this Liberal government as well, where we have such a bizarre hatred to the U.S. administration that is just nonsensical. especially when you consider the fact that together, North America is a wonderful country, or wonderful continent. And it's really weird to me how, you can go up on stage and preach about middle powers, but then having said that, all of those other middle powers are like, yeah, that's nice. And then going off and doing their own things on the side because, they'll placate you, but they also recognize what's at stake here.
Do you think the media is accurately reporting on or describing to Canadian who Mark Carney is?
I think the media, in many ways, is exactly what happens when you no longer have to earn anything from your viewers. So when you have all of your bills paid and you don't have to worry about that anymore, what's your next goal? It is usually to try to get the most clicks. And you see that frequently in headlines. Of course, why would you bite the hand that feeds you? There are absolutely, for the record, lots of reporters who are within the mainstream that are wonderful people who try, but they can only do so much as they're allowed to do. They can only get the airtime that they're allowed to get, But I would say as a whole, Canadian media stopped needing to earn trust and earn credibility. And that has been at such consequence to Canadian citizens because no, we are not informed. We are not actually informed. The role of the press is to question things. It's not to prop them up. It's not to repeat talking points from the party. It is to question genuinely. When you go to a press conference, you should not be listening to the press conference and then asking the Prime Minister a question about the Leader of the Opposition. You should be going to the press conference and listening to him and asking him, well, where's that money coming from? Well, that doesn't make sense. Well, what about this counter argument? That is how you get to truth. That's how you get to critical thinking. And, again, it's like the consequence of not doing that is going to have ripple effects for so many more years on Canadians. Like even if it was all replaced tomorrow, the things that go on psychologically when that is all that you know and all that you listen to. What I always say to people is like, if you want to know what's actually going on, take a look at other media. Oh wait, you might not be able to thanks to Bill C-11 and C-18, but if you could, if you don't have a VPN, take a listen to what other people are saying. I think that's also just a massive problem. In the United States, as an example, this exists in the UK, it exists in Australia as well. There are multiple platforms that are not 100% state funded, like the CBC as an example, but you at least have the ability to have multiple conflicting points of view. They both may be incorrect, but they both may also be onto something a little bit different in a story. And that's how you actually develop critical thinking. That's how you actually get to the bottom of something. And I would just encourage everybody that if you ever are reading a headline from a government-funded media outlet and the headline or the story tells you what to think, you should stop checking out that platform.
That's some very wise advice. Do you think there's a particular story about Mark Carney that the media isn't telling Canadians right now?
His entire life? Yeah, there's dozens of them. I mean, obviously his ties with Brookfield are heavily concerning, especially when you consider the fact that he has met with them since he's been Prime Minister. So much for that ethics screen. That's really bizarre to me. I think, in a normal press, there would be all sorts of different rumors and things like that. And of course, a lot of that is hearsay, it's irrelevant or whatever. But there would at least be some sort of scrutiny with the Prime Minister. And it seems really crazy to me that if you go on CBC's website and you type in the search bar and you search Donald Trump, Mark Carney, Justin Trudeau, Joe Biden, Pierre Poilievre, there are more stories about Donald Trump, as an example, than there are about Mark Carney. The funny thing about that is Donald Trump has only been in politics for it'll be 8 years-ish, like by the end of his 2 terms. And there's more stories about him than there are of Joe Biden. And Biden was in politics in America for 50 years. And there's more articles about Trump than Biden. That's interesting. It's weird to me as well that there's more stories about, Donald Trump than there are Justin Trudeau, who was our Prime Minister for 10 years. That's weird. It's so unbelievably concerning. And I think for Mark Carney, there are so many conflicts of interest there. And of course, those never get discussed. That's weird. That's not normal for a free press, if it's free. And then additionally, too, I think in many ways, one thing I would have liked to have seen is instead of just propping him up during the election, it would have been really cool for the media to actually do their own digging and find the data and statistics. Maybe talk about GFANZ and how it collapsed. Maybe talk about the fact that the EU is not going to tariff us if we don't hit net zero. They will still buy from us as they do from every other country that doesn't have a carbon tax. Like, maybe just do a little bit more digging in that regard, because again, that's how you help people think. I think it would have been cool if the media could have maybe done some pieces being like, where did Mark Carney live for the years leading up to him running in Canada? Why wasn't there more coverage about the fact that he said on stage that he was a European? Why wasn't there more conversation about his wife being a part of the Canada 2030 project and the influence that she had in the Canadian government lobbying unofficially for various climate policies? There's so much there that just doesn't get talked about. And it's not to serve the public. The media is obviously not there to serve the public. It's there to gossip about everything except for the people who are actually running the ship and actually taking risks where our lives and our quality of life is at the end of it.
There are some in the legacy media that say Mark Carney is actually a progressive conservative. And that is maybe one of the reasons why so many conservatives are crossing the floor. What do you make of narratives that Mark Carney is a conservative?
I mean, to be frank, he claims to be a devout Catholic. So that alone would make him probably not like some of the more socially liberal policies of the party. Honestly, it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if there was a voting record that came out outside of Justin Trudeau and Mark Carney had previously voted Conservatives in elections. That would not shock me in the slightest. I would argue that he probably is a little bit more progressive conservative. However, that's completely irrelevant because he is running for the Liberal Party and he is under that banner now. So, even if in his own personal life he may have some of those beliefs, he certainly is not implementing them. He certainly did not write a book about them. And he certainly is not actually living by that. So, I think it's pretty silly to think that that's why a conservative like Marilyn Gladu would cross to the Liberals. Alrighty then. So there's a lot of that where it just feel like it's noise. And I think also what is ultimately happening here, and I saw a comment about this recently on one of my own videos where somebody had said, joke's on him, we already have a conservative government with a red banner. And I was like, what? I honestly think, though, that a part of that could likely be a way to eradicate the Conservative Party as a whole. You take away everything that actually differentiates them. And then you just start telling, and then here's the kicker though, you take away all of those things, not because they're real, not because it actually exists, not because Mark Carney is truly governing like a progressive conservative, but because you want them gone. And then when there's no differentials, we've actually already seen this in the media, then you have the media saying, I just can't tell the difference between them. Like, he really needs to pick a lane. He needs to change because Mark Carney took all of his ideas. So he's the problem. He needs to change. Why is there not that same amount of scrutiny on Mark Carney and how he sold himself to Canadians? And then according to you guys now, he's actually a conservative. That doesn't really check out at all now, does it? So I think it's incredibly silly, foolish, short-sighted. It's obviously narrative framing. It's unproductive. It's not helpful. And it's like, no duh, conservative policies are working. They have historically. So no duh that if they want to take some of those things, but I think that you run a really dangerous game in democracy if you are going to take those principles, that ideology, those values, and put them in with the liberal tent, because you just end up having an absolute mess. You have like a monster cookie of a party at that point. And it is very discouraging to voters because you're blurring the lines on purpose almost to make them forget and to make it, you're like lying by omission. You're manipulating people into thinking that the Liberal Party is something that it simply is not. So
I mentioned the floor crossers briefly, but there have been several floor crossings, and now Mark Carney has a majority despite not earning one last year from Canadians. What do you make of all of this?
A disappointment is how I would put it. A a disappointment in democracy, certainly. There's a lot of people as well who will say, oh, well, it's technically legal. My favorite, though, is when people will say, well, the Conservatives had an opportunity to vote it down and they never did. And I'm like, okay, so do you agree that it's a problem? They're never actually arguing that. They're just trying to have a gotcha with you, which is just a waste of my time. But it's really damaging to public trust. And there are repercussions to that are yet to come, really, when we see how big of a damage that already is. But I think ultimately people will continue to say it's legal. Conservatives had a choice to vote it down. So did every other party who had that same vote, by the way. It wasn't just the Conservatives who voted it down. And ultimately, I think, in Canada, we've never dealt with anything like this before. So I think it's kind of irrelevant to say to people that it's not illegal and therefore it should be okay when you can't even really compare previous legislation because it wasn't about this. This is the first time in Canadian history and also the first time in the entire Westminster system's history that we have had a majority government formed by floor crossers. And if you actually believe that those floor crossers suddenly reimagined their faith and they're now liberals, even though they just ran under Pierre Poilievre and have been serving for under his cabinet and within his caucus, you are surely mistaken. So I'm curious to kind of see how all of that goes. I think obviously it's opportunistic, and every single media pundit who is talking about this knows that. They're not stupid. They all know that it was opportunistic. They all know that Carney has been poaching people. They know that. They'll just never actually be honest about it, which is a damn shame. But I think it's just so dumb almost to get caught into the trap that the debate around this is, because this is unprecedented, a first in history. Therefore, there's no comparisons that we can draw in the slightest. And if you want to try to gaslight Canadians into thinking that they shouldn't be upset about this because of insert irrelevant example here, I think you are sorely mistaken, and you will probably end up regretting that one day, maybe when you lose your seat.
Jasmin, I've heard from Canadians, and they've told me for them, this is the last straw, and that they're now just giving up on Canada. And I've even heard from some people that are in the positions to move to the U.S. that are saying, okay, well, now I want to get my kids out of Canada and move to the United States. I'm done with politics. I've given up. There's no point. I've had people in my comments say, I will never vote again because democracy doesn't work. What do you say to these people who feel like all they can do now is give up in this situation?
Well, first, I hear you. Secondly, I share a lot of those concerns. But third, are you really going to let the Liberals take away our country? Really? Come on. I understand the apathy. I feel it myself all the time. But I also understand that we've had 11 bad years. I would argue the last 7 have been exponentially worse, than the beginning when there was that bit of a honeymoon phase. And that has been incredibly hard. Having said that, though, the power really is with the people. And the only way that they can take that from you is if you give it to them. So I understand people as well, where affordability and all of that too. Ultimately, you have to do what's best for you. So I support that. However, I'm a sucker when it comes to winning, and I just can't for the life of me picture the end of this being yeah, well, I just gave them what they wanted, because that's exactly what they want, right? They want you to feel like you have no power. They want you to feel like the system is broken. That's why it's routinely voices on the right who say that they aren't going to vote anymore. They don't trust it. They're done with this. You never hear that from Liberals, though, ever. Even when it's really bad for them, you never hear that from them. And those people in charge who are making these decisions know exactly what that is doing to the Canadian public. They know exactly how that's going to make you feel. These decisions are not just made on a whim before bed one night on an X post. These are decisions that are planned and calculated, and there's pros and cons, and there's crisis teams applied to them to figure out exactly what's going to happen to people and whatnot. They're very calculated, and they know the reaction that you have is the one that they want, because that's the one that keeps them in power longer. And I do not believe for a second that, we can have 10 bad years and then that's just it. I don't buy that. I think that that's lazy. I think you're giving up. Having said that, though, I'm talking more so for the people who are really bitter about it, but for the people who genuinely, you got a good job opportunity, you look great with a tan, whatever, and you want to move down south, fair enough. That is your right to do so, and I support you and I wish you well. But I would say most importantly, just don't give up. If not for anything else, it's just don't you dare let them do that to you. Don't you dare let them take your country from you. Don't you dare. And there's so many examples in history as well where similar things have happened that have been far more brutal than they are here in Canada. And while it has been hard, I would still remind you to take a moment and reflect on the fact that, ideally you have a roof over your head, you have kids running down the halls, you can go to the grocery store and buy food, even if it's annoying that you can't buy the Cool Ranch Doritos anymore because they went up by $3. We do still live in one of the greatest countries on earth, one of the most beautiful countries on earth. And the power is in our hands to really turn that around. But we need to make sure that we're doing that intentionally and with purpose driven behind it. And giving up doesn't offer purpose at all. It just allows the Liberals to keep doing what they want to do. And I think that if there's anything that we need to show people at this point in time, it's the reminder that democracy only works because we're in it. And we should never, ever allow for leaders to stomp all over us, to mock us like this. And I know for myself, I'm not allowing that. I refuse to allow that. Are you kidding me? There's no way in hell that I'm going to go to bed one day and be like, well, that's it. Bye, Canada. There's no way. My family has been here forever, and this is my home, and I'm never letting them take that from me.
So something that's happening is there are some people who are casting doubts on Pierre Poilievre's future amidst all of this and saying that he's done. And I've heard some people say, oh, he's not even going to make it till the end of the year. What are your thoughts on these calls for Pierre Poilievre to step down as leader of the party? Do you think he has a future as leader of the party? And just what are your thoughts on all of that?
This is where people will probably start calling me names, but whatever. I think certainly he has a future as a leader. Pierre Poilievre is a fighter, if there's anything I know about him. And I understand, of course, why people would feel like maybe it's him. But dare I remind you of the statistics, the youth vote. Some people, they hear those numbers and it just feels irrelevant because they don't care. It doesn't make a difference. I would also wonder, though, too, where are you being influenced by to have that opinion? Are you being influenced by PPC echo chambers? I shouldn't say echo chambers, but just people in general. They comment on my videos all the time. Well, what's their motive? They don't want Pierre to win. They want Maxime Bernier to win, I guess. So good luck with that. Or it'll be disgruntled conservatives who are mad about something. There's also so many people who aren't even in Canada who will make comments like that. And I get it. Like, I obviously understand and I can empathize with people who feel frustrated about certain things, but I really do believe that time is on our side. And so I'm not too concerned about that. And I know for sure that Pierre Poilievre is not giving up on us anytime soon. And really, I mean, if you ever had the opportunity to go to one of his rallies at one point, even before an election was called, there's a caucus around him, surely. And as with any colleague or coworker, you could easily be influenced by certain things, certain narratives going around. I think that there's a lot to say about that, because I genuinely don't think if there had never once been a daily news cycle for a couple of months about how Pierre Poilievre needs to step down, I'd wonder how many people would have that idea in their head, right? And there is this caucus behind him, sure. Having said that, though, there's also the people who voted that caucus in under his leadership. And I think that that's something that can't be taken for granted or overlooked either. And so, you hear Ottawa bubble talk. And to me, for the most part, I'm focused on the conservative movement. I do support Pierre Poilievre myself. I've interviewed him several times. I have a good idea of what his goals are, and I align with them. Of course I do. But I'm also really focused on just the conservative movement. And reminding people that you're not crazy for wanting a strong economy. You're not insane because you want criminals who are violating people to be locked up. You're not a bad person or far right because you want parents to be responsible for their own children. And you certainly are not a mega because you want a small government. That's ridiculous. So I think that, everything that I do is largely for those people. And it's really easy to lose sight of that when you just hear endless headlines that are like tabloids, basically, of like, so-and-so said this, a source says this. Okay, well, what is your motive? And why do they want you to think that? Why do they want you to think that? Like, do you need to remind yourself why it is that you voted this way in the first place? I don't think most people do. Like, most people on the ground don't actually think like that. It's so funny. Like, I hear these narratives all the time, and it's crazy to witness them just get echoed and amplified in real time after they get put out by the news in particular. And that's not to say that there aren't people who may or may not be disgruntled. I don't know. I'm not in the party, but if I'm thinking of any workplace, sure, that might happen. I also kind of think, though, that also might be liberal strategy. I do. How many newer MPs do we have? How many backbenchers are there? And if the liberal talking point that's being regurgitated everywhere is that Pierre Poilievre needs to step down, there's no future of the party without him, well, of course, that's going to influence people who maybe are newer, who maybe don't know him as well. And that's probably the intent, right? But I just think I don't know, I think it's really silly overall. And if we lose Pierre Poilievre, we lose Alberta, we lose Saskatchewan probably. You would lose so many people from the coalition. And I think that people championing that, if they don't realize the significance of him as a leader that is a uniting force in ways that I've never seen before. Like, unions used to support the NDP. They support Pierre Poilievre. And that's really notable too. Like, he has united people, young and old, from across all walks of life in various different ways. And there's a reason for that. And so it's easy to be short-sighted and to think to yourself, well, if we just got rid of him, well, then what? Do you think the media is going to like somebody else? Really? You think that whoever they replace him with it's going to be easier and we're going to really win then? You think the Liberals wouldn't call a snap election if there happened to be a big leadership race? Like, politically, strategy-wise, it's political suicide, I would say, to get rid of him as leader. For sure it is. And I think that people need to remember that and just remember what they're fighting for and not listen to all of the noise, because the noise is there to distract you. And if you genuinely feel that way, like, okay, but pay attention to what it is that gets ideas in your head, first and foremost. And then think about the long term with it. Think about the historic number of votes that we got under Pierre Poilievre. Think about the, in high school, they do those mock elections. Think about those votes from our youth who voted for a conservative majority in those mock elections. Come the next election, those high school students will be voting age. So think about that kind of stuff and think about the impact of actually removing Poilievre. It's not even possible to remove him, but, well, I shouldn't say not impossible, but highly unlikely that would actually come to fruition. So I would argue he has much more support than he does anything else. And people are hurting right now, and I get it. And so they're hurting, and so you want a quick, easy fix. But I can guarantee you that it doesn't matter who is in charge of the Conservative Party, there's going to be just as much noise, if not more. And it's also going to be a huge disadvantage to us if your goal is actually to win an election and actually get some good bills passed.
My last question, staying on the topic of Pierre Poilievre, you recently interviewed him, and you interviewed him in
this building.
Yeah, 201 Portage, the building that I'm interviewing you in right now. And as he was coming in, there's somebody that snapped a photo of the two of you, and people online started making up rumors about how he was supposedly having an affair with you in an office building on a weekend. Being a public figure, you obviously have to deal with some haters and some people that are just dedicated to taking you down. How have you dealt with that? How do you deal with that? And what's your advice to other people that may want to get into this field or know that they may have to deal with haters? How do you do that?
First, I want to clarify that the only reason why I even saw that picture is because somebody told me that it was posted on Reddit, and my first thought was, I wonder how fat I look in it. And then I opened it up and I was like, oh, I actually look kind of skinny. Cute. Okay. In all seriousness, though, that is one thing. And I think that's one of the things that's quite tough when it comes to motivating the base, motivating the grassroots. And yeah, it's not easy at all. And there's so many little things that you would never even expect. Like, people are so demonic and they're driven by the most bizarre things to make them do and say unthinkable things in some cases. I would say, though, in general, and I try my best to live by this, but be wise as a serpent and gentle as a dove. You have to be wise enough to understand the psychology that's going on with some of these things, the mental games, the intent behind it, what somebody's motive is, and then also gentle enough to have self-control and restraint so that you don't fall victim to their trap. You know, people will increasingly say the most absurd things about you because they want a reaction for you, or they want a reaction against you. So like, if you say something back to them, they can use your words and twist your words like a knife against you. And the reason why I say it's demonic is it's almost such in biblical terms, like, demons are always listening and they're always looking for something that they can use against you. So that's one thing I've certainly learned a lot, is that there's so many people where they will try to get more information out of you, but it's not because they're curious, it's not because they're interested, it really is just because they're trying to find something that they can throw back in your face. And I think that when you are aware of that, it just doesn't hurt you anymore at all. It takes a lot to really rattle me. And the reason for that, and this is something that I say all the time as well, like, I hope the people who make false allegations believe in what the truth is and they're confident in it in the same way that I am. And so I think, though, that should never ever be a reason for you to avoid getting involved. There are going to be risks and consequences with everything that you do. But as long as you're always aiming up, what is the worst that can ever happen to you? And the biggest piece of advice I would give is to just not fall into that. And of course, we're humans, so every once in a while we may or may not say something that we regret, or we may not get more personal or something like that. But ultimately, if you can do your best to not be like that and to lead by example, you will certainly be happier and better off for it. So I would just say, as a whole, don't ever let things, especially things that are not true, be what stops you from speaking the truth, because that's the goal, is to make you shut up. And that alone makes me want to keep going. So I have no demons to hide. I mean, honestly, like, I've been in public eye since I was 18 years old. So come at me, bro. I'm really not that concerned.
I hope you liked this conversation. If you did, I want to know what you thought about it. Let me know below. Like this video, subscribe, consider getting a paid subscription. And until next time, God bless.